Hey everyone, I just wanted to chime in here at the beginning and say that there was a couple of really weird things about this episode. One was a technical issue that I'm not really sure what happened, but there were multiple times where my voice kind of got cut off at the end. And so if you hear that, I do apologize for the quality on that. I'm not sure what happened this time. That's never really happened before. And then also just Anna and I were kind of navigating this episode, and it was hard to do so at times because of the vastness of Dungeons and Dragons. So if it feels like we're a little bit all over the place, we are, but I hope it is still an enjoyable episode anyways. All right, hope y'all enjoy. Adventurers and storytellers, players new and experienced. My name is Jared, and with me is my storytelling friend, Anna.
Hello there.
Howdy.
Howdy.
Partner. We will be your hosts for the episode. We are honored and grateful that you have joined us at our table. Here at the Game Table Podcast, we take a look at various board, card, and other tabletop games. We give an overview, provide a little insight on how to play, and share some of our thoughts, all in an attempt to give you an idea of how well it would fit for you and your table. Today, we're going to venture over into the other tabletop games a little bit as we take a seat in the Game Table Tavern, gotta work on that name, where we will take an introductory look at tabletop role-playing games, and specifically Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons & Dragons was originally created and designed by Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, originally published by Tactical Studies Rules, Inc., and is currently licensed, managed, and published by Wizards of the Coast.
Dungeons & Dragons is a tabletop role-playing game where typically a single dungeon master, or sometimes called a game master, will take the rest of the players who are each playing individual characters on a journey. This journey can be a full-scale epic adventure where players are the heroes of the story, doing what they can to save the whole world from impending doom. Or the story could be focused a little bit smaller, maybe on one town. Or maybe all the players are up-and-coming students at a local academy, and they have a very hard homework assignment to go explore the haunted mansion that the rest of the town is too nervous to address. Basically, what I'm saying is the story is only limited by the imaginations of those who are playing around the table. Dungeons & Dragons, as well as many other tabletop role-playing games, can be played with as few as 2 people. And actually, technically, there are some strategies that will even let you only play with 1. And you can play up to as many as desired, although many would recommend a table of 6 players or less. I think I would probably recommend maybe 3 to 5 would be ideal. We invite you to join us today as we discuss some of our thoughts on the game called Dungeons and Dragons.
Anna.
Yes, Jared.
Did you ever play Pretend as a child?
Oh, yes. I was pretending pretty much all the time. It's really like the only way I could get the dishes done was if I pretended that I was in a race against somebody else doing dishes, or perhaps like a lonely slave girl down in the dungeon having to wash all of the dishes of the evil orc army that was keeping me prisoner upstairs in the castle. You know, normal stuff like that.
Yeah. How'd your parents feel about being referred to as evil orcs?
Oh, I didn't tell them about that one.
Ah! Bummer.
I know.
We'll have to let that be a table conversation at some point.
There you go. Well, and depending on if I was on good terms with my brothers or not, they were either also evil overlords, or sometimes they were my twin brother or whatever that had gotten trapped with me. We were going to work out a plan of escape, digging through castle walls or things like that. Like you do.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I did something kind of similar.
When you washed the dishes?
No, mowing the lawn, actually.
Nice.
We were going to war. I specifically was, me and the lawnmower. against the rest of the yard. And so there would be all kinds of phantom monsters, and the grass would be alive, and all the sticks and stuff would be these like random things that would get dropped in our way. So we had a whole deal about that to be able to get through mowing the lawn.
I love that. I should have done that when I was weeding the garden. The best thing I could come up with when I was weeding the garden was that I was trying to survive all on my own out in the wilderness and like harvesting plants for my food and that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, we went straight to war, for sure. But I did some of the other stuff too. Like we pretended to be characters in Harry Potter a lot, or I would pretend to have Pokemon, and sometimes I would cross Pokemon and hockey, and I would make Pokemon play hockey with me while I skated out in the front street.
Which Pokemon is the best hockey player? Or maybe that's a question for a different podcast.
That's a question for a different podcast. You'll have to tune back in.
There you go.
I'll give you my hockey lineup.
There you go. I love it.
So yeah, definitely did a lot of pretend growing up.
Well, so I'll have to tell you then, confession time.
Oh, nice.
Probably I don't know if I've told you this or not because it makes me sound so weird.
I love this because as long as we've known each other, there's not very often on the podcast that I'm actually learning something new about you. So
I tell you things I think are new and you say you've heard them before. So I don't know. We'll see. But one of my favorite things to play was that every single tree in our backyard had a different personality. And so based on the shape of like the foliage in the tree, I would say, oh, that one looks like a giant's head, or this one looks like a dog, or this one looks like that. And then I gave them all names. And then some of them were nice and some of them were mean. And some of them required me to bring them sacrifices and gifts during the day. And then my favorite one, I called it Friend. That was its name, was the one that was kind of in the middle of my backyard growing up. And it was the one that was easiest to climb, and also the one that would kind of hit you on the head whenever you swung high enough on the swing set. So it's kind of like my friend was patting me on the head to say, hey, good job.
Nice.
You swung so high. So yeah, that was a fun game. All the trees had different personalities and interacted with me as I was outside.
Truthfully, I had no idea.
Oh, really?
But that's really cute.
That's a new thing.
I like it. Did they have like different personalities? Like some of them were good and some of them were evil, or were they all friendly?
Some of them were evil. So the dog tree, whenever it got middle of the summer, if you were looking at, so I had this, growing up, I had this kind of 1 acre flat yard. Yeah. And these two trees were at the very back, the giant and the dog. And so the dog was the giant's pet, but in the middle of the summer, they would get big enough that it would kind of look like the dog was like attacking the giant, like the foliage would start to overlap. And I was like, oh, so the dog was really mean and would like always try to bite his owner, who was the giant. And so we would try to stay away from the dog, or like give the giant extra gifts to kind of like make him feel better after the dog had bitten his nose and things like that. So I don't know if like dogs can really be evil. You know, maybe people can weigh in on that in the comments. But
I've met some evil dogs, I'm just going to say.
But it was a bad dog for sure.
Oh, no. Yeah, no, that's awesome. Well, Anna, let's talk about how to play this game of Dungeons and Dragons. And I will clarify, I know there's 1,000 tabletop RPGs out there. And right now, especially, is a very sensitive time to not just focus on Dungeons and Dragons, because Wizards of the Coast made some questionable decisions earlier in 2024. I get it. At the end of the day, though, it's the most popular one. Everybody's talking about it. It's an easy entry point for new players. So today, we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. Now, if that expands and we talk about other ones someday, that's great. We might even mention one or two other ones today. But I just want to kind of give that context as we dive into this discussion. I also want to clarify, last week at the end of the episode, we mentioned that we were going to discuss Dungeons and Dragons as a two-top. And we talked about that some this week before recording and felt like it was kind of out of order. And we needed to kind of do this intro before we explore further into specifics like just playing as two players or play online or different ways of playing. And so that's the reason for that pivot. If there's a well-received reception to this episode, then we will explore it further. But if, our audience is more interested in board games instead of this, then we can pivot on that as well. I kind of hope that this does well, not just because I want the podcast to do well, but I really like sharing Dungeons and Dragons and other tabletop games with people. I think it's a really fun world to, or in this case, many worlds to dive into. But yeah, that's the reason for that. So I just wanted to share that as well. But now all the clarifications out of the way, we can continue on.
All right, so I'm going to give you all a little bit of an overview of how to play Dungeons and Dragons. Now, here's a caveat. Everybody I know that plays Dungeons and Dragons has a full shelf in their library dedicated to Dungeons and Dragons books that tell them how to play. This is not going to be the library version, but this is going to be a brief version just to get us all kind of on the same page here.
And I will caveat your caveat with saying that you don't have to have a library of books to play this game.
No, there are many, many resources online as well. And I'll say Jared will use the books sometimes. But most of the time when I play, I'm just Googling different
whatever
things
the issue is in the moment.
that I want to look up. So basically, you have one person who will be the dungeon master or the game master. This person has an idea of what story they want to tell. And just like we were talking about what things we liked to make believe or pretend when we were kids a minute ago, this is a kind of a make-believe pretend world. And you all are going through and telling this make-believe story together. So the dungeon master has an idea of a little bit of the story arc, some of the main conflicts or characters or quests or enemies that might come across in this story. But the dungeon master also has to be flexible because sometimes the character's decisions don't line up exactly with what the dungeon master thinks the story needs to be. You're kind of all participating in telling the story, even though the dungeon master has the general arc in their mind. So the rest of you all as players are going to have created characters. And these characters can be so complex, which is one of the really cool things about Dungeons and Dragons. They can be different races or species. They can be different classes. They can be different ages, different genders, different backgrounds. You end up picking a race, which will give you certain benefits or features, and you end up picking what path you want to follow. Do you want to be a bard? Do you want to be a wizard? Do you want to be a paladin? Do you want to be an artificer? There's all these different things. Then depending on what path you pick that you want to follow, there are levels that you go through where you learn different skills in the class that you've chosen. And so it's fun because you're sitting around the table and you've got these people that are playing these characters that are different races and different backgrounds, and you're all going through the story with the dungeon master. So how do you go through the story? Well, a lot of it is talking or role playing, and then there are the dice, which are kind of your classic D&D dice that I'm sure everybody's familiar with. So as you developed your character, there were certain stats that were on your character sheet, and some of them might be lower, like maybe my character has a lower intelligence, and some of them might be higher, like maybe Jared's character has a higher strength. When you come up against an obstacle, so say, for example, I'm talking to somebody and I don't really know if I can understand them or not. So the dungeon master might say, okay, why don't you roll a history check? So at that point in time, I would take my dice, I would roll them, and then I would add whatever modifier I have based on my intelligence in the little history skill slot. And the dungeon master, meanwhile, has an idea in their mind about, okay, if I roll over a 15, then I'm able to understand this puzzle or this thing that this person's given me. And if I don't, then I'm not going to understand it. And so that's how the story progresses. So you make decisions, but then you roll the dice to say, what way does this decision go? Combat is also another time where you're going to be rolling dice a lot in Dungeons and Dragons. Almost every single character is going to have something they can do in combat. There's more defensive characters, more offensive characters. There's many different types of weapons you can have. But every single time that you're in combat, you will end up rolling at least twice every turn, because when you're trying to attack somebody, you're rolling to see, do I hit with this attack? And then if you do hit with the attack, then you roll to say, okay, here's how much damage I do. When you're in battle, you're rolling for that as well. Yeah, so this just kind of goes on. And like I said at the start, the players are trying to figure out and beat the dungeon master's quests and puzzles and enemies. And the dungeon master is trying to make it be a fun time for everyone. And generally it is.
Absolutely. And just to kind of clarify the dice that you're using. So typically you're using a 7-piece set. They call it polyhedral dice. you have what is referred to as a D20, which is typically what you're going to be using most of the time. All the checks that Anna talked about, where you're checking to see if you succeed, you're typically rolling a D20. Once you have succeeded on that difficulty check, then if it's something where you inflict damage or something else happens, you roll a different die, which would be associated with either your weapon or your spell or however that may work. It might be some D6s. It might be some D8s or D10s, all of which are in this set. There are D12s and D4s. It doesn't take a super long time to learn those different dice because for the most part, like I said, you're using just the one, the D20, and then the other ones are labeled where they are used.
And I will say also, I talked about taking actions and I talked about fighting, but spells are another very important part of Dungeons and Dragons, and there are many characters that are almost entirely spell-based. When you cast a spell in Dungeons and Dragons, there's usually a rolling component as well. And every time your character levels up, if you're a magic-using character, your spells will also level up. And so you'll have the option to do a lower-level spell in a higher-level spell slot, which will make it more powerful, or you might have the option to pick from some new spells that you've learned now that you're a higher level. And so as your character goes up, whatever specialty you've chosen, whether it be as a spellcaster, whether it be a fighter or whatever, you get additional character abilities as well.
Absolutely. So with most of our reviews or discussions, this is just a very broad overview. There are many more levels to the rules that you can add to your game. And I will add a couple of how to play videos so that you can check those out. One of the cool things that I really like about tabletop role-playing games is that it's very flexible to the table. And so if you want to just kind of dip your toe in and just see if you even like the concept of this game, you can be very rules light. As we go through this discussion, as we've kind of talked about some of the rules, and Anna's mentioned the library of books that you can collect, I just want to make it known that you don't have to have all of that to try out this game.
And I would say also, as Jared's talking about flexing the rules for your kind of entry level and comfortability as a party, there are a lot of rules in D&D, and we have not been a part of or even known of anybody who has played a campaign that uses every single rule. So, I mean, there's rules about how heavy every single item is and how much you can carry. There's rules about
keeping up with every arrow that you shoot.
Yeah, keeping up with every single arrow that you shoot and finding out if you're out. Most spells will have certain components. And even though the components might be easy to find, like a twig, most people I know, if the components are easy to find, like if it says requires a piece of cloth, then the dungeon master doesn't every single time say, where's your cloth, before the person casts the spell. And there may be some of you that play D&D that do follow some of those rules, but I don't really know anybody that it gets so nitty gritty that they follow every single rule about pounds and arrows and this and that, just because the focus for most people that I know is having fun telling a story.
That's right. And I've read about stories of people that do that. And I think if that's what you're into, that's great. And that's one of the other things about this game is that it does something for a lot of different people.
Yep.
And it doesn't have to be the same regardless. So it's just about matching up with who you have at the table and making sure that everybody is having a good time.
Yeah. And I just want to mention that, though, because we're talking to people. We've been talking about board games.
We have.
Up until this point in time on this podcast. And you can't really do that with board games. You can't be like, oh, well, I like these rules, but these rules are too much to keep up with. I'm not going to do that, because that makes the balance of the board game not work anymore. Board games are play tested, and they have those rules in there for a reason. Mm-hmm. But so if you're coming from that mindset, you don't need to bring that to D&D. You can have just as good of a session with D&D, just as good of a time, and you're not doing anything wrong if there's certain rules you decide not to keep up with. But before we get too bogged down in all of these details, Jared.
Yeah?
How did you first get into tabletop role-playing games?
All right, so we have to go back to when I was a wee little lad.
Aw.
I didn't play tabletop role-playing games growing up as a child, but I did play a lot of video game role-playing games. It's all single player. You just kind of go through your story. Played a lot of different ones. If you've listened to the podcast before, you know that I love Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. One of the best stories ever told in all of storytelling, especially in Star Wars. But I've also played games like Dragon Age, Mass Effect, other RPG games as well. And I remember as I was getting into the board gaming hobby, right after we got married, I remember thinking like, how cool would it be if you could do this thing that you do in the video game, but you weren't like limited to what the developers had made? And I remember one of our friends being like, well, that exists. And like, what are you talking about? I don't know that I'd ever even like really been exposed to Dungeons and Dragons at that point. So I didn't really know what it was. But my friend Rick Fox invited me to go play a game. I went and tried it out. I had no idea what I was doing. He actually, it didn't hit me till right now that as I'm talking about it, but he kind of helped lay the foundation for how I approach new players because he asked me a few questions about, okay, what do you want? What do you want to do? What do you want to be? And I was like, well, I want to be a fast fighter. And I think it'd be really cool if I had a pet lion. And so he helped build this character for me. And I went and played. I still stumbled through it, but I at least felt like we were making progress. So that was really fun. And I remember getting into that. And you were kind of hesitant at first, I remember, because you had known people that had gotten into this game and like it became everything.
Yeah, there was this one guy that we were kind of dating, talking, whatever. You know, we liked each other.
As you do.
Yeah, we liked each other. And we were kind of hanging out, going on dates or whatever. And he was into D&D. And I just remembered there would be whole weekends. It was like every single weekend, actually, that he would block out. And it was the entire day. And I couldn't even talk to him or text him or do anything because that was his D&D day. And so that was really my only interaction with it. And so I kind of thought that if you played D&D, it had to just take up this huge chunk of your life because that was what I had experienced. And so, so when Jared went to go play D&D for that first time with Rick Fox, I took him aside and I was like, okay, babe, just, still talk to me and like don't get sucked so deep that I stopped seeing you and this and that. We had these conversations.
It's true, we did.
That was not at all what happened. It was fine. But yeah.
So I played with that group for a little bit. There was a lot going on. Then I think that was while I was putting you through school.
Yeah.
And I was working 7 days a week. And so I would go play every once in a while, but eventually it became too much. And so I had to drop it. But then a few years later, we're still getting deeper into the board game hobby. And then I kind of picked it up again. We had some other friends that were interested in it as well. I still remember we were at Lakeford. This other couple that we were friends with, I was like, hey, do you guys want to try this out? And they're like, oh, yeah. And there was a third couple that joined us too. And me and the one guy, like we were really getting into it and talking about different story ideas and things like that. And I still remember that first session was such a mess. It was my first time ever playing as a game master, but I remember us just sitting in that little bitty living room. I was trying to play some music and we had this like airship combat where you guys were fighting this group of pirates. And I just remember sitting there being like, oh, this is so cool. Like it just totally sucked me in. And that was your first time playing too. So I'll shut up and let you kind of jump in now.
Yeah. That was my first time playing. And I remember thinking that creating my character just took forever. And it was like, that was the whole first time we even got together was just everybody figuring out how to create their characters. But by the end of it, I was so excited. Like I wanted to draw a picture of what my character looked like. And I wanted to write out a whole backstory because that's one thing that I enjoy about D&D is the story. And so all my characters, I want to write out some sort of really complex backstory for them. And so, I was really disappointed by the end of that we didn't actually get to play. I think it was not until the next month that we actually got to do our first session.
Yeah.
And I don't know what you mean about it being a mess. I thought it was a blast.
Oh, it was fun. It was also like,
I'm sure you were super stressed out.
Yeah.
But man, we were like, we met up with each other and then we had the battle and it was just going really good. It was really, really fun. Unfortunately, we didn't get to finish that campaign because the group kind of broke up, but not broke up like we broke up with each other. Just, I think some other people in that group were less into D&D.
That's right.
Than we were. So, but we got to try again.
It was a lot of trial and error.
A little bit longer. I remember the first time we actually finished a campaign, I was like, hey, look, it's possible. Because we'd had so many starts and stops.
We did try
not
several
working.
times. That's right.
But yeah, it was really fun.
That kind of, once we tried Dungeons and Dragons a couple times, which is what we had started with, we got introduced to, so Fantasy Flight Games, which is a board game company, made a Star Wars role-playing game.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was kind of our first toe into a different system.
I think that was the first one that we finished.
Yes.
Was when we started the Star Wars campaign.
That's right.
The first Star Wars campaign, yeah.
Yeah, so we kind of ventured into that, and that was also really fun. I'm thinking about all the different campaigns that we've done in Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
We've gotten to really explore, and I mean, we've kind of been, I think, more consistently on the last few years of playing this game, whereas before it was more off and on. But I still feel like even with the amount of experience that we have played, the amount of different games that we've played, I still feel like we've just kind of scratched the surface as far as the different experiences that you can have and the storytelling level that you could get to and just different things like that. Like there's a lot of depth.
Yeah. I mean, like Jared mentioned, we played the traditional, I guess, 5e D&D system. Then we played the Star Wars system, the Fantasy Flight had done. We did a little bit in a system called Genesis, if anybody's familiar with that. We did one campaign, I remember, that was just D6s. It was just a bunch of D6s.
Yep.
And so we've tried out several different modalities. We've done one-shots, really fun. I got to be a DM for a one-shot for a bachelorette party one time, which was super fun. I think you did something similar for my brother's bachelor party, didn't you?
Yeah, so your brother Dan wanted to do an RPG, so we did a one-shot for his bachelor party, and they got to fight Darth Vader during that battle.
That's right.
It was, Nathan had to sacrifice himself. It was great.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah, so we've done one-shots. We've done smaller campaigns that are more just like maybe 3 to 6 sessions. We've done longer campaigns that have lasted several months.
No, we've had some that have lasted years.
That has, yeah?
We had one that lasted, I think, a year and a half, maybe 2 years.
That's right,
The Stormtrooper one, and I know we're going to reference a lot of Star Wars ones, but...
Yeah, the Stormtrooper one did last a very long time.
That was such a good campaign.
And then, did you ever do the very last session?
Yeah, we got to, well, we basically finished.
We knew what was going to happen.
But it was kind of like what some shows do, where it's like, we have to end this, but we're going to show you a little peek behind the curtain at what could have been.
It was like a little montage kind of thing.
Yeah, so it's like, this would be the next arc, but someone in that group was moving, someone was going off to college, and so that was kind of the end of it.
Yeah.
So we were able to wrap a bow on it, but it could have kept going.
Yeah. And we've played campaigns with a lot of people. We've played campaigns just with the two of us. So I feel like we've gotten a good variety of experience kind of in the role-playing arena and different styles and such.
Yeah, for sure. And you've kind of already hinted at it a little bit, what draws you into this whole genre?
Well, what draws me personally in is actually different than what drew me in to start with. So I already mentioned that I like storytelling and character development and growth and conflict and interactions and those kind of things. I actually double majored. One of my majors was English in college. And so I like writing. I love storytelling. So that's why I enjoy the game. But the thing that impressed me the most about role-playing in general and Dungeons and Dragons when I first got into it is how every single person at our table was able to interact with it from their persona, from who they were. So I just thought that was so cool. I remember one time just looking around the table being like, I'm enjoying the story. This guy next to me is writing music that's associated with our campaign. This other guy across the table is developing original character art for every single one of us. And this other girl, well, I guess she did a lot. She was doing like designing like her own costume and stuff every week and that kind of thing. So it was really cool to me that there could be, it was an outlet for just every single artistic expression that a person could find an outlet in D&D. And we were all working together, and it wasn't like my story overwhelmed his songs
That's
or
right.
her
That's what I was gonna add.
costumes.
Yeah.
In fact, they all added together to make an even better experience for everybody.
No, I think that's a really good example. That was a really interesting time to look around the table and see that.
Yeah.
And just be like, wow, this is really cool. And it was interesting because like I'm thinking about the one who was writing music, couldn't care less about the mechanics of the game.
Yeah.
Was just there to hang out, listen to the story, and participate when it was his turn. And it was cool to write music the rest of the time.
Yeah.
And at
Well,
first,
one of the people that we had around the table that enjoyed drawing original character art would actually like doodle during the campaign.
Yeah.
And would like doodle scenes of like the monsters we had fought and stuff like while we were fighting the monsters.
Yep.
It's like, but that was just what he loved about it. So.
Sure. Well, and that was a really big learning experience for me because I had to learn that there wasn't just one way to play this game.
Yeah.
And as a dungeon master or a game master who's like, I always saw it as my primary goal is to make sure everybody else is having a great time. And they're going to do that through the story and participating and whatever. And I had to learn there's more than one way to participate. That particular group was very good for that. There's been a lot of growing as we've gone through this adventure of tabletop gaming. I'm also drawn in by the characters and the story. You mentioned it a little bit about how you make this character and you start to build their backstory and who they are, and you just can't help but think about it. Like I'll get in the truck after like the next day after I've created this character and it's like all I think about all the way to work. I'm like, man, what if they did this? Or what if they had a sister? Or what if, and then like it spirals into like all these different branches of things that either happened or could happen. And it's cool because a lot of game masters love that because you hand that to them and then they're like, oh, cool, I can use this in my story and make it all tie together to let your players feel more part of the world. So I love that collaboration around the table where everyone's kind of adding into the story and we're creating this thing together. But I think for me, the thing that's been the most cool is to watch so many people that I bring to the table on this game that I kind of know. Like I'm like, these are cool people. I'm cool to hang out with them. And to watch through this game us become really close friends and really get to know each other on a deeper level.
It's interesting, right? Because there's been some times I think I felt stronger feelings playing D&D than I have playing a regular board game. And I have some pretty strong feelings about board games sometimes too, just to be honest.
I mean, you're a pretty competitive person,
I'm a pretty
so that
competitive
makes sense.
person. So as an adult, I don't think I've cried over a game. No, never mind, I have. Only once since the start of this year though, so it's cool.
I love how we went from since I've been an adult to this year.
I was like, no, that's definitely not true. Anyway, when you're role playing, if you think about it like you're acting like you're this character. And so you get very involved with the feelings of this character. And it requires sometimes some out of game resolution a little bit. And so I remember I was playing a game where I think I was somebody's sister or something like that.
Yep. I know what you're about to talk about.
And we had it out as characters. We were arguing and like, maybe blows were thrown. I don't actually remember.
But it was like a legitimate like fight that was acted out.
Yes.
And there was one point I remember looking at one of the other players, not the two of you, and like we were like, all right, are we still playing a game or like is something actually
okay? It's true. And so then after that session was over, we checked with each other and we're like, hey, are we cool? Yeah, we were cool. We were just role playing. We're all good. Everybody else is all good. And there's been sometimes it hasn't been that way. There's been interactions at the table where we've checked afterwards and been like, hey, what you did actually wasn't cool. Can we not have that play style anymore? And so I think just doing that because you're actors and actresses together in a way.
Yeah.
And that requires a certain level of trust in each other.
On both ends of the spectrum, because on the one end, like you want everyone to commit to being their character and to act as their character would. And so like there's this big trope now of, oh, this is just what my character would do. But on the other end of the spectrum, you also have to trust your players as a group that we're here to collaborate and do this together.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can't just go to the extreme of this is what my character would do. You've got to do that within the courtesy of there's 3 or 4 other people at the table, and I need to be respectful of how everyone wants to play the game.
Yeah.
It is a very interesting balancing act, but I agree with you. It is very easy to get emotional.
Mm-hmm.
There's a campaign I played in recently where I was playing this character that was he was just anti like these segregated groups and got really emotional about some things. And you can definitely start to feel it. There have been times where I would play the game and then walk away and be like, why am I so frustrated?
Yeah.
And you're like still carrying the emotion of that game. It takes the whole leaving what happens at the table to a new level for good and bad. Like it's a learning process for sure.
And I don't know if other people may find this helpful, but often we will have debriefs as a group, definitely after a campaign. And when we started, we would do it after every session.
Yeah.
We would have debriefs and say, is everybody cool? Is everybody all right with how that went? Does anybody need to like hash anything out with anybody in real life? Kind of do like a highs and lows, maybe a little bit of something. It provided good feedback for those of us that were learning how to DM. And it also provided good feedback for those of us that were learning how to play our character, but also play the game, which is that balance that Jared was talking about.
I think too, we did a lot of, there's a new-ish, it's not really new anymore, but there's a technique of what's called a session 0.
Yeah.
Where you all do take a night to build your characters, but it's not because you're learning how to build characters.
That's why it took so long that first time.
That first time, you're right. But what is actually supposed to happen is the collaboration of what are our expectations as a group? What are things that are off limits? What are things that we would have that are goals for this campaign? So that everyone understands each other and that you can further that collaboration to work together. So it's very interesting in the way that all comes together and how groups learn to work with one another. So do you have a favorite character or story or moment that sticks with you?
Oh, man. Well, there was this one story moment.
Oh, boy.
Where I was playing in the Star Wars universe.
Okay.
And I was a Dathomirian.
Mm.
And I was just trying to innocently start my own crime syndicate. That was really all that I or anybody else at the table wanted. And and we were playing in the Star Wars role-playing game that Jared told you all about earlier. And in that game, you can roll something called despairs.
Yes.
And despairs are kind of like nat ones, but they don't just mean a failure. They mean some despairing story moment also needs to happen along the way. And so I don't remember how many I rolled of those.
It was a lot.
It was like this interesting thing where I could try again, but like if I tried again, it would be even worse. And I think I maybe rolled.
Because we like started house ruling this thing.
It was
because
like double or nothing.
You guys had this weird habit of rolling like multiple failures or despair and then like 8 advantage. And
that's right.
And I was like, all right, you
rolled
roll
like a ton of advantage, we could roll again. That's what it was.
Like a house rule that we did.
Yeah. And so I really think I rolled 3 despairs in a row, maybe. Jared made my blaster that I shot at this Jedi we were fighting get bounced off of his lightsaber beam and come back and blind me.
Yep.
And hit me right in the eyes, and I was blinded for the whole entire rest of that campaign. I was blind. Luckily, I had the Force, so it was cool. But anyway, yeah, that was, I don't know if I would say that was my favorite moment, but it's definitely the one that stands out the most. And I thought, frankly, it was kind of creative on your part and still let you play the game. And yeah, just goes to show you can think that you're doing pretty good, but man, you get some bad rolls and some really crazy things can happen.
You can go wild.
I did play the whole rest of that campaign blind.
You did. And I think you played it really well. And I think there was still some cool things that came out of that because your player got to kind of develop more on the force side of stuff instead of kind of the trajectory it was trying to go.
Oh, yeah.
And it was a great moment for me because
he loves.
I did not love this character that you were playing.
Whoa, he never likes any character.
That's not true. That's not true at all. I'm editing that out. But no, most of the people at the table did not care for this character. I mean, and I think that's actually a testament to how well you played it, because you're like this bratty teenager who was entitled to this crime syndicate.
I just want my own crime syndicate.
You were just sure that you should have it. And you had mommy issues. You had all the tropes. And it was just like, we all, like, this character was who she was supposed to be. But at times you're just like, not good. Don't like it. So it was a moment where I could just baseball bat a blaster bolt back at your face and feel really good about it. So.
All right. Well, Jared, apparently that's your favorite moment as well.
No,
but,
it's not. It's not.
What was your? So, is there something that sticks out to you?
I really. So I don't want to pick just Star Wars, so I'm going to do a couple different ones. But we did a Stormtrooper campaign, which we referenced, and you all were a bunch of misfit Stormtroopers that we started over COVID. We started out playing online, and then eventually got to play in person again. I just remember that whole campaign. It took a while. We didn't play like every week during this 2-year period, but we played pretty consistently. I remember having so much fun with that campaign. It was a group that I felt so safe and secure in, that as a game master, I could try out some things in the storytelling side of things that I wouldn't normally do. It felt a lot less safe. And if you haven't picked up on it by now, I'm very critical of my own storytelling and my own what I do at the table, because I put so much pressure on myself to make it a good time. But I just loved that whole campaign. There was different things that happened as far as just the chaos of the story went in 1,000 different directions. Somehow we eventually always kind of maneuvered back to center, but it took a long time to get there. It had a variety of different personalities. The table had so much cohesion to it, and it just felt like, man, we just do anything. Like whatever we wanted, we could make it happen. And so that campaign for me was it was such a good learning experience. There was so many failures, but also so many cool things that happened. So that campaign for me was great. I also really enjoy, I don't know that any one moment sticks out for me. I mean, I've kind of mentioned the pirate thing earlier, that we were fighting in that first campaign and just being like, we've made it, as we're in Dungeons and Dragons kind of thing. But no, I feel like there's just so much and it's hard to pick just one. But it's definitely something that the stories stick with you, and these characters. I mean, I remember when I was younger, I don't read as much now because I just don't have the time for it, and that's kind of a bummer, and I should get better at that. But I remember reading fiction as a child, and Harry Potter comes to mind. And I would be so excited to get through most of the book. And then I remember I get to the last few chapters and I would really slow down.
Yeah.
And I would start to tear up and cry because I didn't want to lose these quote unquote friends that I'd been able to walk with along the way in this journey. These characters act in the same way, where they kind of become part of your journey a little bit and you don't want to lose them. So it's definitely something where these moments and these characters stick with you, which is very cool. I don't know. So with that in mind, I think that a favorite character of mine, so his name was Yiska. He was a star circle druid, so very much into astronomy and that sort of thing. He is an Eladrin, so it's a type of fairy, and he kind of, spent half his time in the material plane and half his time in the Feywild, but he wasn't really into like the uppity nature of this world's Fey and how they just thought they were so much better than everybody. And he kind of got to go on this adventure where he experienced all these things that most Fey wouldn't even dare to do. Like he experienced time in the Shadowfell, which is the opposite of the Feywild. It's all darkness and death and things like that. And he made this friend, a character named Nox, who is almost the antithesis of him. He's very like positive and very, optimistic about things, and she had a much more like down to earth, realistic view of the world. And it was really cool getting to explore that relationship, because I'm normally play just like snarky, in your face characters.
Yes, you do.
But I've been really exploring this positive, optimistic, happy-go-lucky kind of characters. And it's been very interesting to explore, because it's kind of challenged a little bit of who I am, as always looking at it from a more pessimistic or realistic side of things in real life. So that's been really fun as well. And then, but anyway, so he got to explore this relationship, and then we ultimately ended up in this false utopia where we're like basically fighting capitalism and taking down the man. So it was just such a fun campaign as well. So getting to have those things kind of stick with you is really fun. So we've talked a lot about a lot of things. So there are various levels of entry with this game. As I said before, there is no need to go out and feel a need to buy every book or buy 5,000 sets of dice. Some people do that. I get it.
Some people enjoy that.
Dice are great. You will probably become a dice junkie if you get into this game. So just be forewarned on that. I think anyone has the ability to play this game as long as they're willing to play pretend for a little bit and trust the people at the table with them. I'm getting ready to try out a Dungeons and Dragons game with my kids. All three of them, we're going to try and see if they can do it. I don't know if Hope's going to make it as a 4-year-old in her short attention span, but I would say from the various levels of entry, I've already told them it's going to be very rules light. They're going to have dice. There's going to be times where I ask them to roll, but most of it I'm either keeping up with in my head or on a computer screen in front of me. I'm not going to ask them to keep up with a whole lot, because I want them to learn the storytelling side of it first, and then we'll gradually add rules as they get older. But there's ways to do that. There's all kinds of resources online to add in. Instead of using the full character sheet, you can use a more basic character sheet that's more friendly for new players. So there's all kinds of ways to get into this game. There's also various tools that help players and dungeon masters. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with that here, just because I don't want the episode to go too long. Like all things in this hobby and in this genre of the hobby, I could be here forever talking about tools and things of that nature. And so instead of doing that, I'll give you a list of some things. Some of the things that I'm going to talk about in the description, there are some rules that you want to add to this game. A lot of those center around building what are called either NPCs, which are non-player characters, or various monsters or monster creatures or just creatures in general that you want the players to either interact with or fight. You can spend a lot of time coming up with all new ones by yourself if you want to, or there's a variety of resources, both official and unofficial, that will help you do that. So that's going to be some of the tools. Other tools are going to be things like coming up with names or creating music to have as a background to be able to help with the ambiance. There's all kinds of different things. So when you see all this, don't feel like you have to jump into all of it, but some of it can be very helpful to enhance your storytelling around the table. The other thing you can do to try out this game, this is another tool, is there are various dice apps, so you don't have to even buy any dice. I have one on my phone that I really like. I don't think it's available on Apple, but it is available for Android users. So you can, just search anywhere in the Play Store and you're going to find a variety of dice apps that you can use.
Well, and I'd say in terms of levels of entry, there are certain classes that are more complicated than other classes. And so I think that is a good thing to keep in mind. So any class that uses magic is going to inevitably be more complicated. And so if you've got a beginning player, it'd be better to have them be one of the fighter classes instead. I just remember my first time playing a spell user and feeling completely overwhelmed by the number of spell cards that I had out in front of me. And every single time it was my turn, I was like shuffling through all of them, trying to figure out what to do. There's a level of strategy in figuring out how spells go together
Yeah.
And how they can be kind of maximized in the game, how they can be used to support other characters. And that's just something that's better, I think, when you've played a few games down the road. So
there's no downside to having a full party of no magic users and just playing as fighters.
As long as your DM's aware that nobody uses magic and doesn't make puzzles that can only be solved with magic.
Exactly. I mean, obviously the DM's got to create a story that works with the party, but I think you can definitely do that in such a way where it allows for you to learn the basics of the mechanics in ways that make it less overwhelming. And in that same vein, Wizards of the Coast themselves have offered some resources that make it easier for dungeon masters, because being a game or a dungeon master is no small feat all by itself. There's lots of things to prep that in theory, there are things that you will want to prep. I have done it before where I've just sat down at the table completely unprepared and just said, okay, we're just gonna wing it, and you get to exercise your improv skills at an amazing level.
But he complained about that for 3 days before and 3 days afterwards.
It's very stressful.
It was very stressful for you.
But it can be done. But no, there's pre-designed adventures that you can download for free off the Wizards of the Coast website, which I'll link as well. And they have character sheets that you can just go ahead and have so that you can fill out what you need to. So there's
even ones that players have created and put online too, if you just wanted to. Yeah. There's
a lot of resources, both official and unofficial, like we've said. And it's definitely a deep well. And I would recommend, at minimum, if you decide it is something you want to do, that you maybe at least purchase the player's handbook. Now is getting close to being a really good time, actually. Wizards of the Coast is pumping out version 5.5 is what they're calling it. But it's a full update on the player's handbook and all those other books as well. You don't need all the books. I cannot say that enough. You don't need all the books.
They look so pretty on your shelf, though.
They do look pretty on your shelf. It is nice. I enjoy taking them with me when we go on vacation, or if I'm going to be in a plane for a little while, something that lets me kind of either study up on a section of the rules that I'm not as comfortable with, or to gain some ideas about what to add into my game or things like that. Or if you're a player, it helps you to learn the game so that when you're actually sitting down, it's not this massive slog of looking up, adding, blah, 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 blah. You're able to just feel like you're actually in the moment creating your character and be able to focus on the creative side of it instead of the rules side of it.
Yeah. And as we're talking about levels of entry, I also wanted to mention that we have focused a lot on, again, the artistic and storytelling side of Dungeons and Dragons. But in case you're sitting here listening to this podcast being like, I like the strategy games and I'm not a very artistic person, is this going to be for me? There are so many people that play Dungeons and Dragons because they enjoy figuring out what the best strategy is and the best way to use their weapons and their skills, and there's a name for them, right?
Oh, yes. They're called min-maxers.
Oh, there you go. I was so close.
Yes.
And so there's that type of player. There are players that play Dungeons and Dragons because they enjoy fighting. And they just enjoy the idea of crawling through dungeons and slaughtering monsters and feeling like this awesome hero.
Absolutely. And you can totally do that. And you can add in maps and all kinds of things instead of it just being theater of the mind, which is what we do a lot of times. Like, we'll occasionally add in maps, but for the most part, it's all just in our heads.
Yeah.
But there are people that commit to battle maps and miniatures and all kinds of things like that, if that's more the side that you want to explore.
Yeah. And so, and I mean, like, I've played with people that have said, I'm not all that interested in backstory or character development. I just like really feeling awesome and beating monsters and fighting. And so that's one too. We've even played with people that want to sit back and make snide comments and jokes about all the other players the entire time that they're playing. And they just use it as a time to kind of kick back and have fun. And they enjoy commenting on the play. And so all that to say, there really is a place for many different types of people and many different types of play styles.
Right.
And my encouragement to everybody out there is to be okay playing with other people that have different strengths and different play styles than you, because I feel like that enriches the experience.
Absolutely. And I would say too, just to add on to your point a minute ago, we've had people at the table that don't role play at all. Like they just say, my character does this.
Yeah.
Or I say this, but they don't ever act it out or anything like that. And there's no, like, fine, no big deal.
Versus the person that comes completely dressed up with their accent that they've developed, that they've been practicing all week long. Yeah. And they don't say anything out of character the entire night. Everything is role play.
Yep.
But those two players are playing at the same table. They're playing the same game.
They can. And it is definitely something that can happen. Again, it requires the trust of everybody at the table to work together in each of their own way. And sometimes it is something where you'd rather be around a table where it's more like-minded focus.
Mm-hmm.
So you just got to make that call yourself on what makes the most sense there. There are, with all that said, some things to be aware of. And this game is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I will start and we can kind of ping pong back and forth.
Go for it.
All right. So the first one I'm going to take is combat. If you like combat and taking strategy on a grid to a whole new level, this will not, you can ignore this comment. If you are more focused on storytelling and you want some combat, but you also want to move on, do not be surprised when combat could take 2 hours, especially when
or longer
you're first learning the game. Everybody's looking up what they can do. Everybody's trying to figure out how the system works. And just like a board game, it's one of those things where it is taking way longer than it actually feels like. And so when you look up and you're like, oh, dang, all we did tonight was this one combat. That's okay. Like, that happens sometimes. You didn't screw up. That's just how it is sometimes. So that's one thing to be aware of.
So I'll probably say something a little bit more just to be aware of. It is something that has made me not like games that we have played. I'll say that. But something to be aware of is that every single person came there to want to play the game. And it's very easy to want to jump in and just tell the story, play the game. Thinking about when Jared was talking about his, single player role-playing games that he would play when he was playing video games. That's where some people are coming from. They're coming from, I get to jump in and figure out the puzzle. But something to be aware of is that when you're playing a D&D campaign with other people, there's a whole table of people that want to play the game. And so it's important to be aware of the amount of time that you've spent talking to somebody, and then maybe next time let somebody else talk to that person. It may feel like sometimes, especially if the party gets like split in half and you're doing like one scene over here with 2 people and the other scene over here with 2 people, it may feel like you're sitting at the table being quiet for 45 minutes while somebody else is taking their turn. And that's just what happens sometimes. And so at those times, you just got to enjoy listening to the other people and what they're doing and wait for your turn. But I do know that the game is a lot more enjoyable when everybody feels like they did have a turn. So I think that's something to be aware of, that there might be times where you're feeling like you're not really doing a lot, but be aware also that you're not the one that's taking up so much that making other people not have enough to do.
I would imagine for most people, this is not your first experience hearing about Dungeons and Dragons. There's a movie out. There's a new video game that's really hot called Baldur's Gate 3 that a lot of people are talking about and kind of moseying on over into the tabletop world because they played Baldur's Gate and they're like, oh, well, that was super cool and it was about Dungeons and Dragons. So now I'm just going to go do it at the table. There's Stranger Things. Yep. Stranger Things was a boon for tabletop gaming.
That's right.
And then there's, you're starting to hear about podcasts and videos that do actual plays. Not everyone, but a lot of people know about Critical Role with Matthew Mercer, or Dimension 20 with Brennan Lee Mulligan. These guys are really cool, but they're also professional voice actors, and they've been trained in improv, and that's like their lives. And so it's very easy to see these things, whether it's on TV or what you're listening to or whatever, and think, this is exactly how I want this to go. And then you get into the game and some people don't voice act at all. Some people don't know the rules. One guy can't stop flipping through the book and just pay attention. So it can be very clunky, especially at first. And so my thing to be aware of is you don't set your expectations so high of what you think the quality is supposed to be. You're all relatively new, or you're all just, no offense, you're all just regular people like me, and you can't produce 25 different accents at one time. And that's okay. I think there's room to give everybody a little bit of grace and allow your imagination to pick up the rest to kind of meet that, what you'd hope it would look like.
Another thing to be aware of is that no matter how good you are at playing Dungeons and Dragons and how awesomely you've built your character, it's going to come down to the element of chance because you're going to roll the dice. And I've been in campaigns where it was really hard for somebody to accept that because they built this super charismatic character and then they rolled a really low roll on a charisma check. And I'm sorry, that person just isn't going to like you. And I think for some people, it's difficult because as you're role playing, you think, okay, if I role play really good, then it's going to work. I've got this great idea for how I'm going to role play this and appeal to this person's interests, and it's going to go great. But ultimately, it is going to come down to the chance roll of the dice.
Yeah.
And if that fails, then you're going to fail. And so that's just something to be aware of, that you're going to have to be okay with that and be okay with you changing your strategy, because at that point in time, you can't just keep trying the same thing over and over again that failed. You got to try to figure something else out because that one failed.
Yeah. Another thing to be aware of is positive intent of everybody at the table. We have talked a lot about how you get attached to these characters and you get attached to the story that you're trying to build, which means inevitably someone at the table is probably going to offend you unintentionally at some point. It is very important that you remember your relationship with that person outside of the table first, and to use your words and talk about whatever it is you're frustrated about or what you feel like didn't go well, and trust that they care about you and will listen to you and hear you. I've heard and read so many stories about people at the table that put their characters before their relationship. And when they do that, it ends up causing a unnecessary rift that could have been worked out if they'd just been willing to talk to each other about it. So I know this seems like really intense when you were talking about a game, but again, you do get kind of attached to these characters and it's easy to take things personally. All right. Now that we've talked about the things to be aware of, Anna, let's talk about advice for people that are considering trying this out.
Right. Now that you've read all of our warning labels,
yes, right.
We'll tell you how to do this now.
Now that all the lawyers have been appeased
That's
and
right.
the fine print has been created.
That's right.
And I will say, like, I don't want that last section to be a thing that pushes you away. Like, the reason we add that is so that you can have a better experience at the table, because I think we've had to experience almost all of those in some capacity.
Yeah.
And have had to work through them. And so, and most of it is primarily because we didn't know what to look out for. So that's kind of why I think it's important to add those.
Yeah, no, you're right. Because we have had at least one campaign that has had to prematurely end because there were some issues that we couldn't work through. And then issues that we did work through and were able to continue the game with other groups. So yeah, don't want that to be your experience. So
Absolutely.
Learn from our mistakes.
Yep, please.
So yeah, I mean, for people that are considering trying this out, I'd say go for it.
Do it.
You can very easily download a character sheet, and I prefer to go through the D&D wiki because I can go straight to, okay, here's the race I want, and then it tells me what to put on my character sheet. Here's the class I want, it tells me what to put on my character sheet, etc. And so give yourself grace with building character sheets. It's fun to do it all together, and it's kind of nice, especially maybe if you have one person that's played before and a lot of people that haven't, then you can kind of all help each other. Don't be afraid to go ahead and just take your time and just let that be your whole first session is building characters.
Yep.
And maybe talk about, then go around and share, talk about, hey, here's what I'm thinking for my character. Here's what I'm thinking for my character. And think of a way that you're going to fit together. So you don't have to start out all from the same family or all from the same tribe or clan. It's nice to have people from different backgrounds and different strengths, but you do need some sort of a story of how you all come together and now you're a party that's going to support each other as you go throughout this campaign. Because if you have a whole campaign full of individuals, that's not going to work quite as well as you're going through. So anyway, my advice is to just go ahead and try it out and to find the way that you think you could enjoy it. So if you get excited about the idea of thinking about costumes and accents, do it. If you get excited about the idea of writing a backstory or of creating art or of creating music or of drawing up maps or even of world building. We had some people that would write stories of other random things that happen in the world that never even happened in our campaign, but just because they thought it was really fun to explore other aspects of the world. And so I'd say just use this as your creative outlet. It's a really good source for that.
I would completely agree with all of that. There's a couple different ways that you can try this game out. You can try meeting in person and just figuring it out as a group. A couple of you could figure out if there's any game stores in your area that host D&D nights. I know there's at least one in our area here in Nashville that does. I don't know. I think there's even room to maybe watch an episode or two of an actual play just to get a feel of what it's like.
Yeah.
Again, heavily emphasizing do not expect your game to look just like it, but just to get a basic for the rules. There's a ton of how to plays on YouTube for Dungeons & Dragons, or maybe you know somebody who's played Dungeons & Dragons. I can assure you 9 out of 10 times if you go to that person and say, hey, teach me this game, you will see them light up in a way that they have probably never lit up in front of you before. So I would encourage that. I would also, not just the Wikidot, if you're using just the basics, dndbeyond.com is a great resource. It helps you go through building your character. It does kind of some of the math and the nitty gritty for you and kind of keeps you on the railroad of staying in your lane so that you're only building within the parameters of what you're allowed to do. That's also a way that you can get some of those free adventures to go through. So I will say this, as much as it stresses me out sometimes, there is room to just sit down at the table and improv it out and just have a set of dice that you occasionally roll to get a check of how well it works or doesn't work, and just tell a story. And then you can kind of continue to learn from there. Obviously, a more traditional sense would be to buy the player's handbook and actually learn the rules, but I really think that's kind of overwhelming. And the reason that Wizards of the Coast makes it so easy for you to learn how to play this game is because they know that once they've got you sucked in, then you're going to spend a bunch of money. So they don't really care if you take their free stuff. So take advantage of that and try it out. And unless you're just only in it for the strategy, I would highly recommend you don't get bogged down in the rules.
Yeah. Yeah. And the most stressful role is going to be for the dungeon master. And so I'd pick somebody that is up for the task. Maybe that's your person that has played D&D before, or go ahead and download one of the pre-written adventures because that takes the stress off the dungeon master. I mean, it's still stressful because they still have to keep up with the story and the different options and the different characters and monsters you're going to come in contact with, but at least then they're not trying to write the story at the same time.
That's right. You still have to read through it ahead of time if you get one of those pre-written adventures. One other thing that we didn't do that much starting out, but I think would have been helpful, is if we just took turns doing one-shots. So if you take a night, you just do like a 3-hour session. Yeah. We
talked about doing that. You
can find some pre-generated characters online, so you don't have to take the time to build characters. And someone is the dungeon master for just that night. And then the next time you do it, it's somebody else's turn to be the dungeon master. And that lets everybody at the table kind of feel the role and who's the most comfortable doing it. Who enjoys doing it. Some people do, some people don't. I've had some people say, I never want to be a player. I only want to be a DM. And I'm like, that's great. I will be a DM. I'd prefer to be a player. And so everyone's got their own tastes on it. And so it definitely is a good way to let you kind of feel it out.
And I just remembered something that we probably should address, that you can put wherever you want to. So we've been talking this entire time, like you've got a group of, I think 4 to 5 or 3, 4 or 5 players is nice, and a dungeon master. So we've been talking this whole time, like you've got this group and they're showing up every week and you're playing games together. But for many people, that's just not real life. There's people that go off and, get married and want to take honeymoons, or who get sick, or who have other obligations. And so while it is most useful if you've got the same party each time, it is not necessary. If you've got a core group that's showing up and somebody has to miss a week, there are ways, and we have done it before, to kind of put that character on autopilot. They can describe, hey, here's kind of what I think I would do next, and you can just have them do that. Or they could, be asleep or be sent off on another journey or something and not be a part of the campaign for that night.
Yeah.
Just to say, because again, I told you all about my fear at the beginning of the person that I knew that it had kind of really consumed their life. That is not the way it has to be.
Right.
You can make it be to where it fits around having kids and having a family and having a girlfriend and whatever else, and still enjoy yourselves. So I wanted to add that in.
No, I think it's a good add. I'll have something at the beginning of the episode before we start, just explaining how instead of doing a traditional 2-top, we're kind of talking about this instead, and kind of mention some of that, but that is a good thing to note. So do you have any other thoughts that you want to jump into right now? It's been a very interesting.
I could talk all night about D&D, so
that's
I should probably stop.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. Is I was like, man, this episode has been so hard because I want to talk about all these different things, but I don't want to overwhelm too much, and so it's like trying to cherry pick the right things. So I agree. We could go on forever about this, but we also have a goal of keeping our episodes at a certain length, and so we're going to try and honor that, and we'll see how the editing goes. But with all that said, thank you all so much for listening, especially if you made it to this point. We would absolutely appreciate your feedback. Give us your thoughts. Do you play Dungeons & Dragons? Are you interested in playing a role-playing game? Are you interested in this podcast, maybe someday setting up an actual play where we actually play through Dungeons & Dragons? I would love to hear feedback on any of that. You are more than welcome to give us that feedback by either checking out our socials, which are all linked in the description. And if you don't like socials, check out our website at thegametablepodcast.com, or you can shoot us an email at thegametablepodcast@gmail.com. Or, as always, you can find us on Board Game Geek. Again, all of those links are in the description. 5-star reviews, subscribing to your podcast player of choice, following us on socials, if that's your thing, and joining the conversation on Discord. All of these heroic actions are immensely helpful in growing this podcast. Special thanks to Angie Santiago for our cover art, and to Anna Snyder who made the music. Join us next week as we discuss Gen Con weekend. So we've given the preview, now it's time to give the recap. Ian and I, maybe Anna and Julia, will see how it goes. We'll be giving our thoughts on what we saw, what we played, what we're excited for, and how the con went as a whole. In the meantime, may your dice rolls and your card draws be blessed, and your experiences at the table be ones to remember forever.
Oh, and then the one that was really easy to climb, and that if you swang on the swing set high enough, it would hit you in the head. That one was my friend, because it let me climb it, and it patted me on the head to tell me what a good job I did when I swang very high.
It's swung, I think.
Swung.
If you want to redo that. When you swang real high.
I didn't know what I was saying. All right. I'll go back. All right.